All right. Howdy, y'all. Galator here. So today, this is the first episode of Philosophy Friday. I thought this would be a really fun idea. Been going through the GG chat on Destiny's channel, where he created a philosophy subgroup, and it's really disorganized, and no one's talking about like specific issues. It's kind of just you're thrown in the middle of a conversation when it's happening. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to maybe do this every Friday or every other Friday. And we pick a topic ahead of time, we watch a couple videos on it, and then if you want, you're more than welcome to jump in the Discord, which I'm going to link right here, and you can chat. We can debate about whatever you're thinking. We can pull multiple people in, etc. So I thought to start is why don't we watch a video? So this video is going to be not the one that I did with Destiny on his channel. I thought instead let's go back to its roots and watch Simon Blackburn talk about Quasi-Realism, because I think that'll give us a good base for where this debate started, and then we can actually start talking about it. So let's pull that up real quick. All right. There we go.
Simon, I really want to know what reality is all about. And I hear this philosophical dispute between realism and anti-realism. Well,
All right.
I don't want to know anything anti-realism. How can I understand how this could happen?
Well, I think there are two kinds of problem about realism. One is the general problem, which is illustrated by Descartes' evil demon, by films like Matrix. Do we live in the reality that we think we do, that we generally presume we do, the reality of chairs and tables and space and cities and the world, or is it all a dream? And that's Descartes' problem, and it's a general problem.
So the evil demon is somebody who's manipulating all my brain cells so that I think I'm seeing you, but I'm really just being manipulated in some abstract way.
Yes, exactly. The update is often the mad scientist who's pumped your brain in a vat and is feeding you signals as if you're living the life that the kind of take us up to be living. Really there's only a dream going on, or only an illusion. So that's the big problem.
Heard the video is not audio, Habibi. All right. I turned it way up. Let me know if you can hear it now.
There are then more local problems of realism and anti-realism. Most of the things we talk about we're pretty happy with. They're good solid objects like chairs and tables. But we also deal in terms of things like possibilities. We deal in terms of numbers. We have things like moral facts. And those sort of fit uncomfortably into the common sense world. For example, you can't take a number and put it in a bucket or measure its weight or volume or anything. It has no such properties.
No age.
No age, exactly. It seems to be timeless. And then there's a question of what is it? Are we right to think there is such a thing? How would we know about it if there was such a thing, if it's got no physical effects on us? And so on. So those are local problems of reality. Do numbers belong to reality? Do moral facts belong to reality?
So just to preface, moral facts is what Simon Blackburn is known for. He does ethical quasi-realism, which is what I was trying to convince Destiny of. But we're going to talk about it in a more of a broader sense, so just reality as in like real objects, real properties. You can talk about moral facts or scientific facts, or even, I guess, the realism of mathematics, realism of numbers is another one. And I'm going to speed it up so we can keep going.
Realism and anti-realism are the two opposite sides on those questions.
So define for me for a minute each one in its own way. Realism and anti-realism.
Well, realism will take whatever the topic is, let's say numbers, for example, and say there really are numbers. They may be strange, they may have timeless properties. It's rather obscure what kind of thing they can be, but we have to refer to them, we have to accept them into our, well, what philosophers call our ontology. That is, they are fully fledged denizens of reality.
This is Plato's world of forms.
Mathematical Platonism is a very salient example of a realism, exactly. Or again, if it was, say, ethics, a realist about ethics is going to say there really are moral facts. There are things out there to get right or wrong. It's
independent of our own views.
Exactly. We have to measure up. We have to get the moral fact right. We have to get the correct opinions about duties and right.
If someone's a realist about moral facts, I would love to talk to you.
And wrongs and values and so on.
Now, it would seem from just thinking about it that numbers would have a more vigorous claim to reality than moral principles.
Yes, partly because the disputes don't break out in mathematics in the same way they do in ethics, so there seems to be a unanimity of opinion, at least at the sort of classical numerical or geometrical level. In ethics, of course, disputes are part of the turf.
Right.
So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, science can't do without numbers, and science, in many people's minds, is the arbiter of what there is. Science tells us what the world contains, and if science can't do without numbers, then we had jolly well better put up with numbers. On the other hand, science does seem, to most people, to be able to do without ethics, sometimes rather too.
So he's kind of assuming a scientific realism there, which is what we're not going to do. So we're going to actually debate realism versus anti-realism for things like science, not just moral facts.
Much so, perhaps. But scientists don't deal with values, rights, duties, obligations. So if we use science as the arbiter of reality, you're absolutely right. Numbers have a better claim than the moral facts or rights, duties, and the rest of them.
So look, I can follow that. I can follow what a realist is. My natural inclination would be to be a realist, trained as a scientist.
Right.
So help me on the other side. If I were to be an anti-realist,
Right.
what would I believe and why would I believe it?
Well, anti-realists can come in a number of flavors.
As always.
As always. The out-and-out anti-realist might just say he's a skeptic, or an eliminativist is the term that's often used. I mean, somebody just thinks we ought to eliminate this branch of discourse. So, for example, take, say, theological talk. Some people might believe that there's a God. They think God is an element in reality. They're realists about God. Other people might go to the other extreme and say, you know, all this theological talk is just junk. We should not be thinking in these terms even. That's eliminativism. In between, there are people who say, well, I'm not quite so hostile to the discourse. I don't mind people talking and thinking in God terms, but you mustn't think in terms of realism. You mustn't think in terms of a three-decker universe with heaven up there, the earth here, and perhaps hell down below. You ought to see God talk in different terms, for example, poetical, symbolical, metaphorical, and religious practices become more like dances, songs, rituals. So those people would be hospitable to the discourse. They say the language is fine, you know, go and read the Bible, it's great. But we're not dealing with a description of an aspect of the world. We're dealing with a different kind of, and the term often used is language game. We're dealing with a different kind of activity. We're not describing an aspect of reality anymore.
Now, the claims of anti-realism go beyond gods or theology to where if I were a full-blown anti-realist, I might think that the whole world is a construction of my own mind.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes, that's the position known as idealism.
Right.
And you are right. That would be a general position, usually associated with Bishop Berkeley in the early 18th century. I just would use theology as an example of a kind of position you could have, or a number of positions you could have about a number of issues. So in theology, we've had the realist, that's the orthodox, as it were, face value view of the enterprise. We have the eliminativist, says let's get rid of it. And in between, we have people who say let's construe the language in a slightly different way, see the activity slightly differently. And in theology, that would be in terms of dance, rituals, practices, congregations, and so on. If you take a different topic, like, say, ethics, you could, in principle, have
Here we go.
the same trio. You could have the realist who says there are rights and duties and it's our job to know about them to get them right. You've got the eliminativist who says it's all a matter of opinion. You can make it up as you go along. Subjectivist, yes. And it's not as important as it's usually supposed to be. And in the middle, you might have someone who says, well, we're not describing an aspect of reality. We may be doing something else, like swapping attitudes or expressing emotions or laying down permissions and obligations and things on each other. And that's a practice, and it's a perfectly decent practice, but it's not describing an aspect of reality. And that would be, as it were, a more accommodating kind of anti-realism. It would be saying, it's in a sense a construction, but don't look down on it because of that.
Would you call that a quasi-realist?
Yes, that's the territory that Quasi-Realists in.
And that's what you are?
Yes, it's not a term I'm terribly proud of, but I'm landed with it. The landscape, when I started to use that term, was very much divided between realists and a number of people called error theorists, of whom the most distinguished was a man called John Mackey, who wrote a very, very influential book in 1977 on ethics. It was a Penguin, in which he argued that really most of our ordinary thought, when we think in terms of morality and values, is founded on an error, a metaphysical error, the error of supposing that there are these goods, these properties, these platonic universals, and there aren't any. Since there aren't any, most of our moral thought is in error. That was the error theory. But I want to say no. I want to share John Mackey's suspicion of Platonism, but I don't want to go the whole way with the error theorist. It's not a fiction that we make up. It's not a fiction that say, I've got a duty to my children. I think I do have a duty to my children. I want to thump the table and insist on that. And if you, for example, attacked me out of the blue, I'd think you'd done something awful, and I'd be very indignant. So I wanted to protect our attitudes and emotions. I also wanted to protect the idea that there's something to get right or wrong, that there are better or worse views to be had about our values and our duties and our obligations. So the question was, could I do that without tipping over into Platonism or realism? And Quasi-Realism was the result. It was usually described as an attempt to have your cake and eat it. So that's how the term came about. I'm not sure it was an ideal term, but it's my own. I've stuck with it.
Wow, that was much shorter than I thought. He didn't even describe quasi-realism. But okay. So you can either, so let's pretend for a moment quasi-realism has not been defined yet, and you are either going to be a realist or an anti-realist. And you can choose lots of different topics to, be about that. You can be a realist or anti-realist about it's big brain philosophy. You can be a realist or anti-realist about physical objects and properties in the universe, or about things that we don't maybe have direct phenomenal experience with, like moral facts. So if you guys are interested, otherwise I'm just going to rant, I am going to spam the Discord and just message me and say you want to talk about something. Anything about realism versus anti-realism. Here, I have to move that real quick. Okay. So I think it's really easy to pretend to be like a realist about the physical world. So I'm going to take a step back from like the whole ethics debate and instead talk about realism versus nominalism. So before people started talking about like moral facts or things that we maybe are a little more, we care more about, like we care about morality, we care about ethics, because that's what we use to influence like political discourse. But before that, we should look at just like the physical universe. And the physical universe is going to be filled with objects, and those objects are going to have properties. So that's like a really good starting point for building up your theory of how everything works together. So let's say we pick an object, and a really fun example of this, and functions. Okay, I'm going to ignore and functions, Raimi, just for a second. Okay, there is a third thing that we should put in our ontology. But, so the first one is you're going to have objects. And let's go down somewhere where we don't have direct experience with. So let's talk about atoms, because atoms are really convenient for like philosophical discourse, because you don't have to worry about like it's hard to talk about like mountains when you're talking about realism versus anti-realism, because we have pretty intimate experience with mountains. You can climb a mountain, you can touch a mountain, etc. But let's talk about electrons. Or atoms. Let's just talk about atoms. So atoms are going to be our objects in the universe. They are our objects. Now we're going to ascribe properties to those objects. Let's say we have a property for mass, a property for charge. Let's start with those two. So let's just say our atoms have two properties, and let's say size. So they take up space, they have mass, and they have charge. So now we've given one object three properties. Raimi was talking about functions. Functions are a little more complicated, because then you want to say, how do properties relate to one another in the physical universe? So like in science, we would say, like charges repel, opposite charges attract. That would be a function between two properties. Discussing whether those are real or not is like the next step. That's a little more complicated, but we should eventually get to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a PowerPoint. Okay, and I'll switch on. Okay, so I do have kind of like a crappy little PowerPoint on this topic with diagrams that help illustrate things. Okay, so you remember how when I was on Destiny's stream and we talked about Quasi-Realism, and he drew a picture. And why don't I just draw his picture real quick? Because I forgot to include it in the video on YouTube. All right, so let's say you have a circle. And this circle is the real world. Okay? And then he drew another circle. And let's say this was he called them theories. We're gonna distinguish between theories and models in a second. So we'll say this is model 1. So this is our model of how we think reality works, and we're kind of accurately describing some part of reality. And then he drew a new circle. We're going to call that model 2. And it is a little bit more of an accurate representation of the objects and properties in the real world, and it overlaps with model 1, but let's say we've gained some stuff and we've lost some stuff. So during that actual talk, I thought this was maybe a really good representation of how this would work. But in hindsight, thinking about it, there is a problem. There is a problem with this. You can't have your circles overlap. So by overlapping your circles, you're saying that whether by accident or on purpose, or you think it's possible, the object or property described in your model or function is a one-to-one with the one in the real world. I guess maybe if you're a realist, this is no problem, right? You think that you could realistically model our atom and charge and mass and spatial dimension. You think that you could accurately model that how it is in the real world. But the anti-realist would say, no, that's garbage. There's no way, accidentally or purposefully, you could model how that works in the real world. So what we're going to do is we're going to stick to our two-circle diagram, just for the moment. Let's say you have the physical world. So the physical world is unknown. We have no direct or intimate experience with the physical world. Out in it, maybe, there are objects, and there are properties, and I actually say here natural laws, so there are your functions, Raimi, it's good stuff. But, where's my thing? There it is. But we have no experience of this. We can't put together the physical world based on what we know. Instead, what we have is we have the scientific world, or our modeled world, if you will. It will never overlap with the physical world. It has entity star, object star. That is our atom. I'm going to use electrons. Let's not do atoms. They have parts. All right. That's our electron. It has its own properties: charge, mass, and maybe dimension. And we have constructed natural laws to relate those properties between different atoms in the world. And that is our scientific world. That is how we think the world is construed in such a way. How did we build that? Well, we have phenomenon. We've experienced, that's all that means. We have experience through different scientific methods, etc., of something unknown. Maybe it looks similar to how our electron looks, but it's not. Even if the real world's electron has a property that does things like mass and a property that does things like charge, they aren't the same properties, because we have no way of having any knowledge of how those would possibly work. So saying you're more accurately representing the world would not be a good way to put that. Instead, what you could say is, I have my little scientific world. I have my own object star and property star in that world. And I can use those. I create natural laws with them. I can assign functions that can make predictions, etc. That's where it stops. The one thing that makes this a little bit different than anti-realism is that we can then abduct, and that sounds weird, but you have deduction, induction, and then abduction. And through abduction, you can make, I say inference for that, then it's inferring. You can make the inference that you are describing potentially something unknown. And that's all you can say. That's where quasi-realism ends. So it's not quite realism, because you can't say that there is regular object, regular properties, regular functions. But you can say that it's a semi-decent, like there's something out there that you're modeling. So you don't have to be such a pessimist. You can give it a chance. But yeah, that's really the main thing I wanted to say. Theories are a little bit different just because we have like our phenomenons, we have the physical world we don't know anything about. We're using those to build a model, but it's not like we have a giant pot of, I don't even know a pot of experience, like just a bunch of data, a bunch of empirical data about the world, and from it we picked it up and we like put the pieces together and we built how we think it works. We had theories first. We have preconceptions or functions, as you said, natural laws of how we think things relate together, and then we looked through our pot of empirical data in order to construct the model. So maybe it's not such a good idea to say that what am I trying to say? I really want to get this right. It's not such a good idea to say that we took all of our empirical experience of the physical world and built a model out of it. It's more like we built the framework for a model and then shoved our data into it to make it fit, if that makes more sense. So I have a couple people now in the Discord channel. If you guys want to just send me, like, type into the general Discord what you want to talk about, just like a word or a sentence, and I will throw you on into the callers thing, and we'll give that a go. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep looking at these diagrams and talking about them. Oh, a word, a sentence. All right, you've made your way in. How do I drag you? All right. Slim Jew, you're coming in.
Oh, this is the secret room.
This is the secret room. How are you doing?
Pretty good. You want to do me a favor and move the brown-haired person into this room?
Brown-haired person?
If that's okay with you. There's two icons there. You got like a pale girl and a brown girl. You got to move the brown girl.
Oh, one other person. I see. Oh, the icons. All right.
Yeah.
Sounds
it's
good.
Nut.
All right.
I don't know why I didn't just say move nut, but
you should have said. Instead, I'm like looking around my room like there's no one else in here. All right. How's it going, Nut?
Good.
All right.
I'm Julian.
Hey, Julian.
This is Kevin. And me and this guy get into some high-level philosophy debates like all the
Not
fucking time. Oh wait, I forget. Am I allowed to curse on this?
Yeah, I don't think Discord cares, so you can curse all you want.
Oh yeah, I meant like your stream.
Oh no, I don't think Twitch cares either. I'm not big enough for them to care, so go for it.
Okay. So he kind of showed me this, and I don't know exactly what I want to even talk about. I think when provoked, I'd probably talk about something. So.
All right. So okay. I guess I can kind of prompt you guys. I'm curious. So the main topic of this stream is going to be realism versus anti-realism, and you can pick what you want to be a realist or anti-realist about. Classically, people typically talk about like moral facts or ethics, but I think it's way more interesting to talk about science. So I guess I should ask both of you about science. Are you a scientific realist or anti-realist?
I'm pretty sure I'm an anti-realist, although I'm not exactly sure on the terminology.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure.
Okay, so...
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Slimju.
I was gonna say I'm not really sure about the terminology.
Okay. Well, here I can give you guys like the 60-second version, and then you can shape your opinions accordingly. And then, so the realist about science would say that in science we have certain objects and properties. Let's say we're talking about electrons, because they're small and they don't have parts maybe, so it's easy. And we have an electron, that's our object, and it has properties like charge and mass. The scientific realist would say the electron is real, it exists in the physical universe, completely independent of human thoughts and activity or language muddling it down. It's like its own thing, right? Now, the anti-realist would say there's no way to have any physical experience of the external world. So to say that the electron's a real thing out there, that's not possible. You can't have knowledge of that. So the electron doesn't exist.
So like a skeptic.
Yeah, a hardcore skeptic.
Yeah.
Can I be a scientific anti-realist without the last part, like declaring it does not exist?
Yes, you can be a scientific quasi-realist, which is really, really my point. Yeah, so are you guys from Destiny's stream or from...
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that's why? That's why that's how you know each other.
Yeah, here, let me... Yeah, so... Here, wait. I'm not going to watch it, but let me see if I can find the part where he works his way through that logic. In planetary... Alright.
Yeah, I'm
So
familiar
if
with
you-
that logic now, by the way. I get it.
If you don't think it's possible to know one way or the other, are you a quasi-realist?
No, then you're just agnostic and you don't have any good philosophical, like...
Isn't that like a skeptic, though? Like a philosophical skeptic is that you don't think knowledge is possible, even?
I don't know if you'd call it a skeptic in science or in philosophy. It would just... Because you can be skeptical about a lot of individual things. In this case, you're skeptical about the existence of real things in the world. A scientific anti-realist would say that they just don't exist. And if they do exist, you can have no knowledge of them. So you would probably be an anti-realist if you are like agnostic about the problem.
Yeah. Okay.
The quasi-realist makes that final jump, which I haven't mentioned. The final jump is because you have some sort of like maybe predictive success using your models or your scientific models in general. You can make the inference, like the abductive leap, that somewhere in the world there is an object with properties that you might be describing. But that's as much as you can commit yourself to.
Yeah, we agree with that.
All
Yes,
right.
What do you mean we, dude? Why don't
I
me
mean,
and
I don't
you?
know, because we agree on like most stuff, dude.
I don't know. I'm skeptical that knowledge is possible.
Ooh, all right. So
Yeah, me too.
we can. All right. We can take a sidetrack and do knowledge real quick. All right.
Sure.
All right. So knowledge. Let's define it as, or classically, it is defined as justified true belief. So you have to meet those three criterion for something to be knowledge. So let's talk about, or let's stick with the electron. Let's say like scientific knowledge. It's either going to be true or not. So independent of you, either it exists or it doesn't. That's the true part. Having a belief is just, you don't have any like say in that. Like the fact that we're discussing it means we're talking about belief statements. Like you have a belief about electrons. It's true or false, but it also has to be justified. And that's where like all the epistemic problems come into it. Like, can you justify your belief? And you said you don't think knowledge is possible?
Yep.
All right, so you would probably... Are you saying that you just can't justify anything you think you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely nothing, though?
Yep. Everything.
What about, like, just, like, Cartesian, like, I think, therefore I am. Like, you are a thinking thing, and you exist. Your existence.
So the process that you're using there is a process of deduction, which is based on principles that may not be true. You just assume they're true, but to assume they're true, you have to use deduction itself, so it becomes circular.
That's true. I guess I should say, so the Cartesian argument for the ego, that is supposed to be... I know, okay, I'll admit I hate when people do this in philosophy, but I think at the very bottom you have to do this. There is a... some things may be axiomatic or self-evident. I don't think very many things are. Like, I hate when people talk about morality and they go moral facts or axiomatic. I mean, I think that's garbage. I don't know. Are you guys
Basically,
like moral realists or?
I think every claim, there's three different things it can be. It can be regressive, it can be circular, or it can be axiomatic. Regressive is that whenever I ask you to explain it, I'll just keep asking why, and you'll never be able to give me like an answer that I can't ask why to again. And then axiomatic is you just have to assume that something is true without actually having a justified basis for it completely. And then circular obviously is, you know what that is, right?
No, I agree. I mean, any epistemic argument will eventually, like, if you keep asking the question, we'll get down to that. But I mean, most people that argue epistemic things will assume some sort of base. But if you're just a skeptic about everything, then there's not really a good, I don't know, I can't save you.
Okay. I mean, like, I don't think that, like, because of that, like, every other thought is useless. I just, you know, it's just an observation.
Okay, well, why don't you think everything else is useless? Like, well, why does scientific discourse matter at all then?
Because even if, like, we're living in a skeptical world where, like, everything may not even be true, it doesn't matter because I do live here, right?
Okay. So you do live here, but you...
Probably. Okay. I think I do, at least. It doesn't matter if I do or don't, because I think I do.
So you because you think you might live here, we should care about the things in this maybe pretend world you might be living in.
Yeah.
Do you build like an ethical theory out of that? Like, is that like, do you think that's why ethics matters then? Just because you probably live here, so...
Yeah, pretty much. It's just like egoism, I guess.
You are off Destiny's stream.
Of course.
Just so you're aware, by the way, everything he said would have also come out of my mouth if you asked me.
Okay.
So we're still on the same page. We haven't split yet.
Okay. Let me think. Skeptic about everything. I'm trying to think. All right, what about okay, that bothered. What about the fact that you are conscious of something? Like you are capable of experience. Are you a skeptic about that?
Yeah, that could not be true. It's
How?
possible that is false.
How would it be false that you are not, or that you are an experiencing thing?
So the problem with that is you're using deduction and logic, and that system of logic may not be a sound system to make...
Well, you can't say logic may not be sound, because the soundness of an argument is purely based on it being logical. Like, what do you...
definitionally, but...
Okay.
So, like, the scientific method, for example, it appeals to things that happened in the past. So, like, if I drop a cup on the ground, it will shatter every time. That could not be true. There could be a time where I drop a cup and it just doesn't shatter.
Well, that's true.
Because we have to appeal to the past to make claims about science. And the same thing is true of logic, I think.
Okay, I agree with what you're saying about with science. Like, that's like some healthy Humean skepticism. Like, just the idea that... what was his example? He always used, like, the sun... We count on the sun rising because it rised every day, blah, blah, blah. But actually, I don't think that's necessarily how, like, most science works. I think instead, you have, created your... were you here when I pulled up my little shitty diagram? Let me see. So you created this little scientific world, if you have the stream up in this corner, and it has, like, object, sun and earth, properties, mass, and then natural laws. Then you ascribe natural laws relating those properties. None of those could be real. None of those could exist in the physical world. We've just, through phenomenal experience of the physical world, we've constructed these, and we have predictive success. So, are you arguing that, like, what am I trying to say? It's not necessarily just based on past experience. It's more like we think that these natural laws, we're modeling them as if they're real because we think causality is possible. Like, you can have causal connection. And I think
Sure, and... I mean, I would agree with that's, like, probably true, but it could also not be true. Can't say that it is true. For a fact.
I mean, that's... Damn, you're a healthy skeptic. Okay, but so logic, though. You think logic is the same as, like, all this, like, physical, phenomenal experience. And a lot of people think logic is, like, a priori. Logic is not something we see in nature. It's something that... like, logic and mathematics might be the one real thing there is.
Yeah, I understand that, but isn't it circular? Because to explain that, you have to use logic itself.
For mathematical realism, yeah, it is a circular argument, but
Can I shed a different perspective on this?
please do.
Because I agree with this, but perhaps for different reasons that he might not agree with. But if you're going to defend logic, you still have the liability of being you in this world where we think things make sense, but we might be wrong for all the skeptic reasons. So the fact that we trust logic, that logic makes sense, and that we can trust that if A equals A, then A equals A. This, in objective reality, we have no idea of knowing if that's even true. So logic itself falls under the I guess you call it what is it called again? Fuck. The a skyloscope. What is it called? The things that like look really weird.
Oh, oscilloscope.
Kaleidoscope?
A kaleidoscope, yeah. So.
Okay. No, that makes sense. I'll respond to this.
We called it. What do we call it? Shitheadism.
All right.
Yep.
All right. Let me think. Okay, so at least mathematical realists, I mean, you have to eventually work your way down to A equals A, but that is seen as like a self-evident truth, one that doesn't necessarily rely. Okay, so self-evident truths I think are slightly outside the realm of logic, like you're using. Let me think. I guess I'm
axiomatic.
Yeah, definitely.
No? Okay.
I think, I mean, if you want to have an epistemic argument about realism, about logic or math, you're going to get down to an axiomatic principle that you can't get out of.
Yeah, I don't reject axiomatic claims. I mean,
all axiomatic claims,
so.
or
sure, if I guess, because nothing can truly be justified like 100%. Obviously, since I'm like a huge skeptic.
I mean, Kant thought you could, but fuck that guy, right?
Yeah.
I guess I'm just curious. So you think that you may not be a experiencing individual just because you think that axiomatic claim of I is I is not never can be justified. Like it's not self-evident. You don't have like some Kantian intuition about it. It's just
yeah, because usually the difference between that and like other skeptic beliefs is like if I can give a skeptical possibility for when something isn't true. Like if we say, is God real? I could just say God could not be real or it could be real. And I can do that for everything. Like if we think the world is true, I could say that maybe it's just simulation. And the reason that people get hung up on this is because it's hard to do that with this, because you can't just say, what if I wasn't experiencing anything? Because I just am. I know that I am, right? But
right.
I think that, because you have to use, logic, and I don't know if logic, it's, just because I can't explain a possibility where it can't be true doesn't mean that it's always true. I don't know that for a fact. Same reason I don't know that past events will always repeat themselves in the future. It's the same way.
Okay. I mean, I'm not going to actually argue. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to give an example of what it would mean for you not to be an experiencing thing, because that is, by definition, the most foreign thing possible to your, mentality. Like, I don't think it would be possible to imagine that.
It could also be that what we're seeing right now is what it is to be non-existent, which makes no sense, but...
Yeah, but it doesn't have to make sense, because maybe logic isn't real, or true, I guess.
It's like,
real, but...
this is the skeptic box, and to shut the box we need to grab the tape of Axioms and fucking close it so that we can move on to other shit, because you can never leave here.
I think you need at least one axiom, and I think that if you really want to get down to it, that axiom is probably just going to be like the self-identity principle, A is A, and out of that you can build logic. But I think you have to start there. And yes, if you want to be a skeptic about that, by all means, power to you. Like I don't know how else to. I guess I couldn't build a coherent ontology ever unless you had that. Like otherwise, it's just chaos.
Yeah, like Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson.
Pure chaos. Shit meme. Anyway,
That's okay.
But I have axioms. Like, it's not like I just reject all ethics and morals just because I'm a skeptic.
Well, I'm curious. What moral axioms do you think there are? 'Cause I don't think there are any.
moral axioms, not like objectively for each person, but like rather individually.
Oh, well,
Like
okay.
the id, like I should do things that I want to just because I don't know, I should, I guess, like that.
Okay. Well, those aren't like moral facts though. Like that's not, I wouldn't call that an axiom. You're just saying that's
Why not?
You mean like objective axioms, like that exist
yeah.
in the world?
Yeah, because we're talking about realism versus anti-realism here. So I mean like axiom is in an objective moral fact in the physical universe.
Oh yeah, I don't think you can have any objective morals like that.
Oh, well, that's what I was asking. You're good. I want to find someone who's a moral realist because they'd be.
God could be real though, so maybe.
That's true.
Right.
I mean, I would probably start like making individual axioms that like resonate with like every person, or at some level every person, and that would be the closest thing that I might be able to defend to a objective moral axiom.
Okay, so just like some kind of like what do they call that in normative ethics, where you just build a ethical theory off what is like most beneficial to.
Not most beneficial, but I think like something that like all people agree with in the right state.
Right state, like they just like similar cultural background. Is that what you mean, or what do you mean right state?
No, I think most people like in our world are out of sync, like not only with the world but like in themselves, and they don't know how to reconcile that. And also some people are just at different points, like on a circle, I guess. If their lives are a circle and they have like high points and low points, like a Ferris wheel, then everyone's kind of out of sync with one another, and we don't know how to ride it. So I think
what would be in sync? Like what would it mean to be in sync?
Probably to kind of like a Buddhist meme, to be like at peace with like every moment you're in, and to not try to make things happen all the time and focus on being something or doing something, but rather letting things happen to you and letting your actions and your own thoughts and mood happen.
All right,
just being okay with it.
To kind of like just branch off from this, I know we're straying a little bit from realism versus anti-realism, but a topic I'm going to do eventually is going to be consciousness. Would you say you're a physicalist or a dualist? Like,
physicalist and materialism are the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a physicalist, but I guess I'm also like a monist. That like I believe like the physical world and the mind are like one thing.
Well, that's fine.
They're not really separate. They're not like, so it's not purely physical, but I don't know. I mean, I guess it is, but it's also purely mental.
Well, okay. So you can be a monist, and you can be a monist that's either physicalist or mentalist. Like, for example, like some of those like really hardcore Buddhists and stuff. And I think like the physical world is an illusion, blah blah blah. Or like if like Leibniz had his idea that everything's just a bunch of monads, which are mental things. But I feel like I'm trying to. So if you think it's only the physical world, and like mental activities are purely physical, I don't quite get your Buddhist meme there, the out of sync part, because that means everyone is just an individual mind in this little physical construct. There's no way they could ever even potentially be in sync. Unless you think there's something external.
Why?
Well, how do you think? I guess what could be in sync if everyone is physically different?
Let's say that you like drew a circle for everyone, and you described their own version, or they would describe to you their own version of how they see their lives, or their place in their lives, and their, I guess, attitude, and you could map that to a place on a circle, and I think you could have a similar graph for everyone.
I would say like maybe if you were a physicalist, and let's say I cloned 100 of you and I raised them the exact same way, I would say yeah, those people could fall out of sync and eventually get back in sync. Like they could like, create a coherent worldview that works for all of them. But since everyone is going to be physically different, unless you're making some sort of argument that because we all like co-evolved together that we all have like some similar base, maybe like that's some young like psychology, like emergent consciousness, like it evolved in all of us from the same root, and that's why we have similar.
when I mean that they're in sync, I don't necessarily mean that they're identical, and I don't mean that they feel the same thing. They have their own unique version of, I guess, something that you would, for lack of a better word, called happiness, or like I guess nirvana, with wherever they are, and they would interpret it in like a way that is almost infinitely their own, but also a very, very similar state. This is like a weird thing about our world, is that a lot of things that are one thing are also the inverse of that, like how humans are so smart yet so dumb, that we are all very much our own person, but we are also very much the same person.
Okay.
And all things are kind of like that. Like even things that are immaterial, I think.
Okay.
I'm sorry, not immaterial. Even things that are unconscious, like rocks.
Okay. Well, I think we got a little off topic from the realism, but I think either next week or the week after I am going to do consciousness. So if you want to like hone that out a little bit, we can actually drill into it. But I think we have someone else that wants to come in and talk about realism versus anti-realism. So do you mind if I boot you guys out and bring them in?
Yeah, brother.
All right, cool. Yeah, come back for consciousness though, because I'm very interested in these questions. I actually have no idea how to boot you guys. Can I just throw you in general?
Yep.
Nice. All right. Now we have Habibi. Actually, one second, Habibi. Chat, I'm sorry. I am interacting with chat St. Just Germany. I just forgot it was up on my computer. So, all right. Hadamimi, what do you want to talk about?
How's it going? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you doing?
Cool. I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm good. Pretty chill Friday. I'm sorry, I'm saying your name wrong. Habibi.
Good too. Do you know that word?
I don't. What does it mean?
It's like a term of endearment in a lot of like Arab places and stuff like that. It's a cool word.
I did not know that. Thank you for teaching me.
No worries, man. So yeah, I think I'm kind of on the anti-realist side of the debate. And I've been doing a lot of research recently because what my background is essentially thinking about science. Like I'm kind of philosophy of science, but I started off more in biology, thinking about like the theory of life and evolution and that kind of stuff. Okay. So I'm kind of a little bit newer to a lot of the philosophic groundwork, but I've been reading up like a lot on this area and also a lot on like linguistic areas. So what I was thinking was with this debate is like the thing that Piaget made a comment about in structuralism.
Okay, do you want to give the chat there Piaget's comments on structuralism? Just
sure.
So everyone's up to speed.
Yeah, basically, a structure which he said was that they're wholes, and wholes are something greater than the parts. Structures are not aggregates. They are characterized by transformation. They're not static, and they're self-regulatory. So what he had a really good description of there was like structures like logic, math. He was also analyzing structuralism within sociology, in science and scientific theory. He talked about Kuhn and he talked about Foucault in that area as well. But the main point, which is, I think kind of brings it back to realism versus anti-realism in this kind of debate, is like with his charge with like mathematical structuralism and the ability to like do add and subtract, that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. The question I would have is, does that represent something real in the universe? It's something that transcends like a lot of like, I think that I agree with you that talking about like moral claims and whether those exist or not are kind of useless in the debate at this point, just because you're talking about like real world things versus non-real things, right? But it seems as if there are structures of real things that have repeatable to do it, and they live we're not going to call it like reality. I don't know really what to describe it, because it doesn't even seem to be either noumena or like phenomena. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. With like the ability to go like +1 or -1 structure.
Okay. So I guess most people that are you're if we were gonna like boil it down, we're gonna talk about you're essentially arguing the structure of mathematics, or at least like some like mathematical structures that we use, such as like 1 + 1 is 2. Do those represent something that is wholly or really represented in the physical world?
No, I'm not talking about the physical world. I'm talking about the structure itself, like
Okay.
of like being able to do like math. Like, are you afraid of like non-Euclidean geometry as opposed to like normal, just standard Euclidean geometry?
Yeah.
All right. So within both of those structures, they have relational aspects to them, which allow you to perform work. You know, it's like with Thomas Kuhn being able to solve puzzles with your paradigm, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you're able to do this in like manifest real ways that are comparable across these different paradigms. Like that's what like a lot of what Piaget was pointing out in structuralism is that they have a lot of properties that emerge over the different fields, and you're able to interact with those things. So it's like, where do those live in terms of like a realist, anti-realist?
Well, I feel like if you're a realist, the only place those things could exist is like you have to like have some kind of like, you know, Platonic heaven or okay. So I guess if we want to boil it down, let's stop talking about like scientific realism and talk about just like realism versus like nominalism, which is actually where I've heard like the term structuralism before. And so let's say you have, so you mentioned when you're using these different structures, sometimes like these different relations will pop up that seem to be like, I won't use the word real, but they seem to be beneficiary, or they're in multiple structures and we use them as we move between structures. So those, okay, so let's take a step back. Instead of talking about the relations, let's one step back would be the two like properties that are being related. Because talking about like the real or anti-real state of a relation is a little bit more complicated. But let's
I think it's kind of the crux of the issue, though, isn't it? Like that's like kind of where I would say the interest lies. Because with the physical world or not, that's more of a matter of like your interpretation between like noumena and phenomena, right?
Mm-hmm. So are you?
So I think that like.
No, go ahead.
Oh yeah. So I was basically thinking though, like. It's that relation in and of itself that seems to me to be something that is actually present in the material universe. So I don't know if that would make me a realist or an anti-realist or what, but because of the existence of these certain things, it's hard to describe how they kind of world and actually manifest themselves physically. But if you have the ability to do something like, you know, like with a common standard relational practice, like even with so much of our quantum mechanics boiling down to things being relative between 2 points, I think that justifies in itself looking at it like it's some sort of the real universe in some way.
Okay, so I said I wouldn't, but I'm going to actually bring it back to scientific realism, because I think a good analog for that would be natural laws. So yeah. People debate all the time, like whether or not the object in your theory or model, if the object in your model or the property in your model is real. But then the only way science works, any kind of scientific model, is you now have to ascribe relations between said properties in order to, you know, build predictive models or try to like match past data. So where would those natural laws exist? Fuck. I guess, are you a realist or an anti-realist about causality?
You want to rephrase it?
Yeah. Let's say, do you think that you can that event A, let's say you have a chain of events A, B, C, D, E. Do you think that there is a real / let's still keep in the realm of science, a real or physical manifestation of going from point A to B, or do they just each give rise to each other, not directly linked?
I think it's all within like the gauge of where you're looking at it. You know what I'm saying? It's like within the gauge of the relation of point A to point B to point C to point E. Like that's kind of what I'm arguing too, is like with it's the actual movement of A to B to C to D to E to F that's giving you the ability to even comment upon that structure in reality. It's the relation between those things that's actually the event that we're describing. So I think it transcends more than just like these like objects and other objects. It also has time and your ability to relate back and forth between them as the ability to observe and manifest itself as something that's real. But like, for example, I do think that you can say there is point A that goes to point B, point C, D, E, F in terms of its relation to time and to past events.
Okay. So I guess, should I say, so you are arguing, let's say, do you have the stream open? So you are trying to ascertain like the real status of, well, what, that is not a circle, of 1 and 2. Like either causal relations or any sort of like relation or function that they're used differently in different theories, but like relation, function, natural law, do those exist? Like the relational properties between two objects?
Right, and I would say that so much of the language and what we're actually describing when we describe things that are happening, manifested in the world, that's where a lot of it lies, is directly within these relational things. So you're not being in motion, right? That's your ontology. Like you're going through the world, discovering things, looking at things, experiencing things, and that actual relation and relativity between things is what's actually leading to the events of what we call like experience and like noumena acting with like whatever your phenomenological sources are to create phenomena is like all measured on this like area of time. So if you have these things that work across structures, like for example, like not even like 1 + 1 = 2, but even like the ability to go 1 + 1, and then there's a negative reaction for that. 2 - 1 = 1. Like that ability to do the exact same thing in logic. You know what I'm saying? It's like logic axiomatically shares the ability to identify like A, E, I, O sentences, right? Mm-hmm. And you can switch things around and cause like non-negatives and stuff like that. And it's very similar to mathematics. And exists as far as I'm concerned. Like I'm like really anti-realist talk. I think it's closer to a paradigm than what like the realists are trying to say. But there's certain aspects too, because like that's what I was kind of like looking into when I was reading this book. Was I was reading a bunch of like Derrida ideas, and I came to structuralism to see the other side of the argument. And I think that there still holds a lot of water for structuralism.
What's the name of the book?
Particularly one by Piaget.
Yeah.
It's a pretty short book. It's like an essay.
Okay. That's good.
But he's just summing up all the different types of structuralisms out there, and then he talks about Foucault epistema, and which is basically like a Thomas Kuhn paradigm, but for like all of history.
Okay. I'm a big fan of Kuhn. I'm trying to think. Have you heard of Ernst Mach? M-A-C-H.
Mm-mm.
So, again, my background is like almost purely philosophy of science. So like, part of this is getting a little abstract, but so classical gravitation, like Newtonian gravitation, you had just like objects and properties, and those properties we ascribed a pretty, mystical relational law between them, just in order to have predictive success. And no one would say that relation was real. And then you go into Einsteinian gravitation, and you get there's actually a mechanism for how these properties relate in the physical universe. And some people will argue it's real, some people will argue it's not real. That's kind of a difference of opinion. But before Einstein, there was a guy named Ernst Mach, and he had a theory for gravitation which was pretty ahead of its time, and it was purely relational. So instead of making like the arguments that this object had a property called mass, and that is a real property, and then we had to somehow explain that relation between them, all that really exists is the relation. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
Agreeing with you.
Oh, you're agreeing. Okay.
I was just saying right to go around. Yeah.
I mean, I am a fan of Mach, but I'm not sure. I think it's really difficult. It's difficult to like create an ontology of just relations.
Why would that be? I would argue that's what language is. I think that's what like Derrida's main claim is when he was analyzing language, is that it's all just relational.
Yeah, okay. I'd love to have an argument against that, but I really don't.
Yeah, well, I think like the standard like sign like versus like the object that actually exists in the world. Like,
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
like, God, I'm trying to remember who did this originally. It might have been Rousseau. So, but anyways, he was trying to basically claim that like a piece of language, right, exists, that it describes something that actually physically exists in the world. It's actually like kind of mirrors the realism anti-realism thing quite quite closely. At least like a lot of the logic follows along the same path, which is why. But basically, you have this sign that's representative of the object in the universe, right? Would you agree with that? Like a lion is a lion, and I could say the word lion, and I'm like trying to signify a big cat.
Oh, like just from like a practical standpoint, yes, I think that, yeah.
Yeah, from a practical standpoint, exactly. So he was taking like that kind of strict realist idea of like, okay, this sign is like one-to-one relational, this other thing. So what Derrida came in when he did his deconstruction of language, what he was talking about was that like the meaning's actually always deferred. So like I could call you, because I don't know, like you don't have super scraggly hair right now, but if you did and you had like a big old beard, I could call you a lion. You know what I mean?
Right.
Really hard for people who ascribe that like realist of like one-to-one attributing, this lion to a cat. It's really hard for them to defend any argument because the meaning, as Derrida said, was always deferred. Well, actually getting back to the point that's actually linking the two things together.
Well, I think it's really okay. I think that argument's really easy to argue against, like the real status of like objects or properties, like from like that Derrida argument with language. But how is it any easier than to talk about relations using that same sort of language? Like how is a one-to-one relation between, like let's say we have like some causal natural law and we are trying to describe a real causal natural law in the physical universe? How do you know that's a one-to-one? How do you not know you're just maybe you're just seeing a trend, and we should be Hume. We should just be skeptics. We don't know if that's an actual trend. It's just we fit this natural law, but it doesn't actually exist in the universe. I mean, doesn't the same criticism exist? Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's like the good criticism of what I'm trying to say as well. Although I do fall back into a lot of like Hume thinking. Like I'm a fan of like emotivism too, and I think that a lot of good ideas come from that. So I agree with what you're trying to say, but I think that like what you were prescribing, is what you would do. You would fall more back into like that Humean skepticism, and then try to figure out ways that you can solve and make useful machines in order to work your way through. But I think in general too, just because you have a physical model of a physical object doesn't mean that itself isn't relational. You know what I'm saying? Like that's why I do really agree with all of the anti-realist positions, especially when it comes to forming these paradigms and other useful tools for interacting with the universe. Like I absolutely think that's going on.
Okay, but are you then inferring the actual like real status or the existence of that relation in the physical universe, or wherever it may be, just based on its success here? Or are you saying okay, good.
I think that that's more of what an apt description of what we're actually doing is. If like your goal is to just take all the steps back, right, and really try to figure out what's going on in terms of reality and what is like going on in around you, I would say that the best way to look at it is through a series of relations, and that relations to each other are good indicators of how you can prescribe certain properties. And a lot of the words we use evolve into other symbolic representations of things, and that's where we get a lot of our meaning from. Like, I would say that is more realistic. Now, if we're going to talk about what it's more useful to do in terms of operating in the real world, whether you should take a realist or anti-realist approach to analyzing like philosophy of science, right? Yeah. It's like the science wars, like what side of the science wars were you on?
Well, I'm a big fan. I'd say I side a little bit more with Thomas Kuhn, but But my official position is scientific quasi-realism, so it's closer to anti-realism, but
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
But and like anti-realism is probably pure model. If we're going to be talking about like whatever the hell we want to call them, paradigms, models. I've heard him described as, like, as I was saying before with Foucault, and he's talking about like history as itself as sort of like a construct, you know, call them epistema. It's a pretty widely held idea, and I think that if you're a realist or anti-realist, like I would posit that idea of like your concept of quasi-realism, as far as that model is concerned, is like a pretty apt model of what's going on.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, it's like I think that that's. It's something that it's pretty easy to stomach once you start looking through like I think Foucault's the easiest way through that, because you start to see a lot of the historical kind of get started. I would say that that's like a pretty
okay
to figure out. Yeah,
no, I think that's great. This is. So I was just informed by my fiance. Normally, this will be way longer. I'll do this like for 2 or 3 hours on Friday. But I was just informed that I do have to actually get off to go do something with my Friday night. But I'd love for you to call back, because I think I may do one a little bit. I think we might do one on language and meaning, and that will definitely bring in some Derrida. So if you'd be interested, love to have you back.
Good day.
All right. Here, I'm gonna. Thank you. All right. Thanks, guys, for watching. Really appreciated this. I've loved this. This has been really fun. I'm going to pick a different topic. And just off the top of my head, next Friday is going to be limits of consciousness. And what I mean by that is look into dualism versus physicalism versus mentalism. And we are going to talk about just the problems of consciousness and what side of the fence you are on. So thanks very much. And until next time, au revoir.